Weekly Spooky is brought to you by our generous supporters on Patreon. Get access to exclusive podcasts, videos, and more for as little as $1 a month when you go to WeeklySpooky.com and click on the Patreon link. Your support has gotten us to 100 episodes, so join up today and help us create another 100 and beyond. Head over to WeeklySpooky.com and join the Patreon.
What's that? You want to be scared? Come with me. You will experience tales of horror, ghosts, and death. It is not recommended for the weak at heart. Listen in the dark. It's more fun that way. This is Weekly Spooky.
Hello, my friends. It's Wednesday, and you know what that means. It's time for a little spooky in your weekly. I'm your host and narrator, Henrik Kuto, and we have the perfect story to chill you on a very hot and muggy week. But before we get to that, I want to take a moment to say thank you so much for listening to the program. I really do appreciate it. And if you have a moment, please head to your favorite podcast app and make sure you're subscribed, because every week we bring you a brand new show. And while you're there, why not leave us a star rating? It really helps new folks discover the show, which of course makes sure that we keep on bringing the spooky on the weekly. And if you want to help us even just a little bit more, we do have a Patreon. If you go to weeklyspooky.com and click on Patreon for as little as $1 a month, you can help us continue to bring the show for another 141 episodes. Every month you get a bonus episode of Weekly Spooky along with many other perks and my undying gratitude. So head to weeklyspooky.com and click on Patreon. We've had a huge influx of new backers, and I really do appreciate it. But let's hit 100 backers this year. We're already at 84. So help us out. weeklyspooky.com. Click on Patreon. But now, my friends, I have a very special story for you. Because you see, where I am, it's hot, baby. It's so hot outside. It's over 100 degrees right now in Ohio. And I'm sure where you are, it's a bit on the warm side too. Well, this is the perfect summer story about fun, sun, and a body of water that maybe you should avoid at all costs. So enjoy the story right now. The Spirit of Langley Pond by Charles Campbell. Summer, 1981. Elena Ann Sanders swam for all she was worth. She could hear the echo of her mother's sentiment in her mind. Don't get into any trouble. Call me if you need me to come get you. No questions asked. Elena wished she had listened to her mother. Instead, it was nearly midnight, and she was swimming for her life to shore. Elena was beginning to think she was going to make it. She was going to see her mother again. The crack of a gunshot was the last sound Elena heard before the darkness of the water claimed her. Langley Pond was going to be her grave. Summer, 2021. Langley Pond had changed quite a bit in the last 40 years. Being billed as the largest pond in North America, it was nearly the size of a lake. No longer were clay mudslides used as makeshift boat ramps. Now, there were full-fledged paved boat ramps descending into the water. There were designated picnic areas spread around the shoreline, along with a few cabins that were rented nearly every weekend. It was almost 10 o'clock at night, and the humidity of the day still hung in the air. Brianna Turner glanced at her cell phone. It was 82 degrees. Ugh, I can't believe how hot it is, Brianna said. She peeled a strand of sweat-stuck hair from her forehead and grinned at her boyfriend, Andy Spires. Andy smiled back and said, "Yeah, it was over 100 today. Thought we might get a little relief by being near the water and all. Guess not. At least we have the cabin with the window unit. That's a plus." "You're right. That's a plus," Brianna agreed. They both turned toward the woods when they heard snapping twigs and shuffling feet. "Hey, Frog, y'all catch anything?" Andy asked when he saw Frog Spradley and his girl of the week, Jenny Coggins, clear the tree line into their sight. "Had a few nibbles, but nothing big. Threw 'em all back," Frog said. Jenny smiled, but she didn't look all that happy to be traipsing through the woods. "Good thing we brought beanie weenies then," Andy said. Jenny gave him the "you can't be serious" look, and Frog replied, "Damn, man, you are a lifesaver. Beanie weenies are the shit. I thought I'd have to break out the Vienna sausages and saltine crackers." "Hey, Jenny, you want to go in the cabin and cool off?" Brianna asked. "Yes," Jenny shouted. It was hot, she was sticky, and if this excursion with Frog taught her anything, she was definitely an inside girl. The boys watched as the girls walked into the cabin. "Okay, Frog, where'd you find that one?" Andy asked. Frog gave him a sneaky smile and sheepishly shrugged his shoulders. "Come on, man. I don't recognize her. She ain't one of your usual valley honeys." "She's from Martinez," Frog whispered. "Why are you whispering? She can't hear us out here. What in the world were you doing in Martinez? And how'd you get her? She looks too sophisticated to be stomping around Langley Pond. Especially with you. The Prince of the Valley. She don't know nothing about the valley, does she?" Andy asked. "Well, she does now. I told her about the spirit of Langley Pond," Frog replied. "You didn't. And she hasn't left screaming?" "Not yet. Maybe it's because her phone died while we were fishing. She seemed more interested in whatever was on Instagram or Facebook than catching a catfish." Inside the cabin. "Oh my God, that AC feels fantastic," Jenny said, and stuck her face in front of the window unit. It was turned all the way up, and Jenny's sandy blonde hair blew behind her like she was riding on the back of a motorcycle. "Yeah, it's the only cabin out here with one. Andy sprang for the extra $60, said it would be worth it to sleep in comfort, and he ain't wrong. It's sticky as hell outside. How long you and Frog been seeing each other?" "Oh, I just met him yesterday." "Where are you from? You ain't from the valley." "Valley? What's the valley?" Jenny asked. "You're in it," Brianna answered and continued. "You know that main road you took to get here? The one that went through a bunch of little bitty towns?" "Yeah," Jenny replied, and turned to face Brianna. Brianna was grinning, and her brown eyes were gleaming. Jenny really paid attention to Brianna for the first time, and she had this country girl pretty thing going for her. She looked like she could be fun in the sack, but could kick your ass out of it if necessary. Well, that road is 421, and 421 is the valley. Rednecks for as far as the eye can see. And you got yourself what we call a valley prince. That right. Why is he a valley prince? He's a Spradley, and Spradleys have been around the valley for as long as anybody can remember. Everybody calls him Frog. I don't even know if that's his given name, but I know his daddy was called Frog and his daddy's daddy was called Frog. They own several businesses in the valley. His brother Ricky owns Valley Video. His other brother Johnny owns Spradley's fill-in station in Langley. His sister Darnell, well, she owns a beauty shop in Gloverville named, can you guess? Spradley's Beauty Shop? Jenny asked as she shrugged her shoulders. Yep, nailed it. So if you're from the valley, you know who the Spradleys are. Oh, really? That's good to know. So what do you know about this spirit he was telling me about while we were fishing? He didn't tell you about the spirit of Langley Pond. Please tell me he didn't try to scare you with that story. Brianna suppressed a chuckle. He did, and it did freak me out a bit. Is there any truth behind it? From what I've heard, these local legends start with a grain of truth somewhere, and that grain grows and gets exaggerated over the years. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Am I wrong? Should I be afraid of a ghost in the pond? Jenny asked. Brianna smiled and motioned for Jenny to take a seat in the living room. Yeah, I know about the grain that started the story. It was something that really happened about 40 years ago. It went something like this. Summer, 1981. It was Friday morning, and Elena bid her mother farewell for the weekend. Her mother's voice issued a lifeline as Elena walked out the door to meet her boyfriend, Dustin Hines. Don't get into any trouble. Call me if you need me to come get you. No questions asked. Elena told her mother not to worry and that she would be home on Sunday night. Hey, babe, Dustin said as Elena hopped into his Ford pickup. She leaned over and gave Dustin a quick kiss before she pounded the dashboard, which meant it was time to burn rubber. Dustin pulled out of the driveway and beelined to Belvedere Clearwater Road. Finally! Elena shouted. She was ready to have a weekend alone with Dustin. They had been talking about it for the better part of 6 months. Elena leaned her head out of the open window to feel the wind in her face. Hey babe, watch out for telephone poles. You don't want to get your head knocked off. It would really, put a damper on the weekend, Dustin said as he tugged on Elena's arm. Okay, I'm just excited, that's all. I know it's just Langley Pond. Just Langley Pond? Just Langley Pond? You know it's the pride of the valley, Dustin said. He looked at Elena with his blue eyes, and he could see her melt, just a little. You're laying it on a little thick there, ain't ya? Everybody knows Richardson's Lake is the pride of the valley, she said, enamored with her man. I beg to differ. You can't put a boat on Richardson's Lake, and I really don't know how they can call that tiny mud puddle a lake anyway. Langley Pond should be a lake. I mean, it's as big as one. Speaking of boats, Elena interrupted, does your daddy still have that John boat at Langley Pond? He does, Dustin smiled. Trolling motor? In the back of the truck, Dustin answered. Sweet, Elena replied. The pair rode in silence for the next 9 minutes. Elena hopped out of the truck as soon as it rolled to a stop just inside the confines of Langley Pond. I can't wait to jump in the water, Elena screamed and shed her clothing as fast as she could, revealing her bathing suit underneath. Dang, girl, you ain't gonna wait for me to put up the tent? Dustin asked the air. Elena was already splashing in the water. Dustin set up the 2-person tent and pulled the trolling motor from the back of the truck. Elena swam to shore when she saw the tent was all set up and the trolling motor was attached to the John boat. Hey babe, we gonna do some night fishing? The bass should be popping top water plugs tonight, Elena said as she took a seat in the lawn chair set outside the tent. I reckon we can do that. Mama packed up some ham sandwiches in the small cooler and I got Pabst in the biggin. I love you, Dustin. Shut up, you do not. You just want me for my money, Dustin joked. The couple ate sandwiches, drank beer, let their food and drink settle before they made clumsy love in the tent. Elena fell asleep with Dustin's arms wrapped around her. She woke up 5 hours later, alone. Dustin? You outside? Elena asked as she rubbed her eyes and stretched. She shuffled out of the tent and heard the frogs croaking their night tunes. The crickets returned a symphony of their own. Dustin! Where you at? You know you can pee in front of me. Elena shouted. She looked around and was comforted that the truck was still parked in the same spot, so Dustin didn't decide to go on a midnight snack run and leave her out here all alone. But he didn't answer her, and that was a reason for concern until she saw the light from the flashlight out in the middle of the pond. The John boat wasn't there. "That sorry sack of potatoes," Elena shouted. "Dustin, get your ass back over here and pick me up!" She hollered into the night toward the light of the boat. The light flashed in her direction, but the boat didn't move. "Don't make me swim out there, Dustin. I swear I will, and I'll make so much noise that no fish is going to bite for the rest of the night. Don't test me." Elena was leaving playful and moving into pissed off. The light flashed in her direction once more, but the boat still did not move. "Okay, I'm coming." Elena sloshed into the pond and began swimming toward the boat. The boat still didn't move. The longer she swam, the angrier she became. He better not dare ask for sex the rest of the trip, is what she was thinking. Not even a hand job. The light still shined like a beacon from a lonely lighthouse. Elena was about 30 yards away from the John boat when she realized something was very, very wrong. There was a figure standing in the center of the boat. A figure that was a mite bit shorter than her boyfriend. That was their John boat. But that wasn't Dustin. Elena swam a little closer to see if she could make out who it was standing in the boat, and screamed in horror when she saw what the man was holding in his left hand. It couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of joke. Her mind was telling her someone was just pranking her. The man in the boat swung his left arm up, around, and launched the severed head of Dustin Hines in Elena's direction. She waited what seemed like hours on the sound of the splash, and when the sound came, Elena turned around and swam for all she was worth. Elena felt as if bricks were weighing her down. The burning in her lungs felt like she inhaled lit gasoline. She could hear the echo of her mother's sentiment in her mind. "Don't get into any trouble. Call me if you need me to come get you. No questions asked." Elena wished that she had listened to her mother. Instead, she was swimming for her life to shore. Elena was beginning to think she was going to make it. She was going to see her mother again. The crack of a gunshot was the last sound Elena heard before the darkness of the water claimed her. Langley Pond was going to be her grave. Summer 2021. Jenny's face was flush when Brianna finished the story. "Was that true? What you told me?" she asked. "Pretty much. I don't know if that's exactly how the conversations went down, but the facts are Elena and Dustin went to Langley Pond. Dustin's head was chopped off. They found the body in the boat, and Elena had been shot in the head. It took them a while to find her body, though. Longer than it probably should have. They say her body was in the pond long enough for her spirit to be trapped here. Some people say they can hear splashing around and hollering sometimes. Me, I think it's just the bass having their late-night snacks. They can make quite a ruckus when they're attacking frogs, lizards, and whatnot. I wouldn't let it scare you too much, though." Brianna finished and patted Jenny on her hands. "Did they ever catch the guy that did it?" Jenny asked. "Well, that's the thing. They did. That's how we got this story that's been passed down for 40 years, but he was shot in the head with a long-range rifle as he was escorted to the courthouse. Let's just say the police didn't spend a lot of time looking for the killer of Billie Jean Morris. From what's been passed down, a lot of folks think it was set up that way. The police can turn a blind eye sometimes when it comes to valley justice, especially when it's a couple of local kids that were killed. Kids that everybody knew. Kids that everybody loved. There were some rumors that it was Elena's daddy or even Dustin's daddy. They were both avid hunters with rifles to do the job. They weren't even questioned. I don't blame either one of them if they killed Billie Jean. He deserved it, Brianna finished. Jenny looked at her in all seriousness and said, "What if Billie Jean didn't kill them? What if someone else did? And what if that someone else is still around?" Jenny asked, clearly working herself up into something that Brianna thought was silly. "Calm down, girl. It was Billie Jean. I know it was Billie Jean. It's a valley thing. You wouldn't understand. Now let's go see what those boys are up to." Frog was grinning from ear to ear as he saw the girls approach. Andy was downing another PBR. "I was beginning to worry about you two. You get your girl talk in?" Frog asked as he grabbed his own PBR. "Yeah, something like that," Brianna replied and winked at Jenny to let her know it was okay. It was just a stupid local legend. Nothing to worry about. "Frog, are we really having beanie weenies for dinner? I mean, I'd rather go to the store and grab some sandwich stuff. Maybe Brianna and I could run to the grocery store real quick. We'll get a bag of ice and some more of that beer y'all like." Frog was all set to disagree and force the beanie weenie supper, but when the B word came up, he changed his course of thinking. "I think that'd be okay. What do you think, Andy? The girls can go get the sandwich stuff and another case of beer. I'll contribute $10 for the cause," Frog said and pulled a crinkled bill from his well-weathered leather wallet. "Yeah, I reckon that'll be okay. Brianna, take her to the Bilo where Jimmy works. He'll let you buy the beer with no ID. Brianna rolled her eyes at Andy like she didn't already know that. She had bought beer at that Bilo since she was 14 years old. The Valley kids knew where to go without being ripped off. There was always the quick shop option where the owner would only sell the swill known as Milwaukee's Best for triple the labeled price to desperate teens. That's the only way he could get rid of the crap, and he had to carry it because it was such an under-the-table moneymaker for him. Any way he can stick it to the government and help raise the next generation of Valley rats, the better for his Valley pride and his pockets. Andy tossed the truck keys to Brianna. "Be careful, babe. Don't wreck my truck and don't get caught with that beer." Brianna gave him another eye roll and trotted to the driver's side. Jenny felt a wave of relief when Brianna started the engine and the cool air from the AC kissed her face. "Andy," Frog said with a wicked grin. "Yeah?" "I had Jenny going pretty good with the spirit of Langley Pond. You want to have some fun and scare the girls when they get back?" "More Jenny than Brianna. I know she's tough to scare." "I don't know, man. That new girl might go off the deep end. I mean, you don't know her all that well, and it'll severely reduce your chances of playing hide the snake, if you catch my drift. It'll be more like a whack-a-mole," Andy replied and smiled. "I don't care," Frog began. "I don't think she's going to give it up anyway. May as well have some fun with her. She's creeped out over the ghost of Elena Sanders." "First, what did you have in mind? And second, if Brianna gets pissed, it's on you," Andy replied. "Look, while they're gone, I'm going to go to the edge of the woods over yonder." Frog pointed to the shoreline at his left. "You see that cluster of trees over there?" "Yeah?" "Well, I'm going to go over there behind them trees and start tossing some of the red bricks that Ricky put over in that clearing into the pond. He'll never miss them. He done forgot he put them out there. And check this out real quick. Give me a second." Frog ran to his car and Andy could hear him rustling before he came trotting back with a palm-sized speaker. "It's a Bluetooth, man. I'm going to play some Halloween screams out of this bad boy. It works right off my phone. And while you're doing all this shit, where am I supposed to tell them you are? Tell them I went to the other side of the pond to go gigging. Brianna will believe that. She knows how much I love to go gigging. And when she finds out that's a lie, then me and my right hand are going to be best friends for the rest of the trip." "I don't think so," Andy replied. "You have to take the fun out of everything, man. Look, I will tell you that I was going gigging and I'm going to disappear for a little while. Then you won't be lying and you can act like you're just as pissed as the girls. I suspect I'll be taking Jenny home after this stunt and you and Brianna will be all alone in the cabin." Frog grinned and poked his finger through the hole he made with his other hand. A smile ran across Andy's face. Now that sounds like a better plan, my man. I know nothing, I see nothing, I hear nothing but the spirit of Elena Ann Sanders splashing and screaming in the water. That's the spirit, Frog replied without realizing the pun. Darkness was closing in on the valley when Andy saw the lights of his truck coming down the path. "They're back!" he shouted, which sent Frog scurrying for the tree line. Brianna and Jenny were still laughing from their conversation on the trip back. "Hey girls, need a hand?" Andy walked toward them. "Where's Frog?" was the first question from Jenny's lips, and Brianna already had her doubting eyes looking around for the mischievous valley prince. "He'll be back directly. He went gigging on the other side of the pond." "What's gigging?" Jenny asked, thinking it was some made-up thing by these valley people. "He went to kill his namesake," Brianna answered. "Gigging is when you basically take a 3-pronged metal spear and go stab frogs with them. Don't worry, though. Frog isn't killing them entirely for fun. He'll cut the legs off and fry them up." "Ew! He's going to eat their legs?" Jenny couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Yeah, I'll probably eat some too. Andy, though, he's not much on frog legs, are you, babe?" Brianna asked. "Y'all can have that. If I eat a fried leg, it better have belonged to a chicken, that's all I'll say." "Did he say when he's coming back?" Jenny asked. "Well, with Frog, you never can tell. If he starts sticking them left and right, it might be a while, but if he can't catch them, then he might not be gone so long." "Is he good at catching them?" Jenny asked. "Best in the valley," Brianna replied. "Oh," Jenny said. She thought that was a hell of a way to treat your date. Send her off to get your beer while you go kill frogs around the pond. Jenny made up her mind that Frog would have to take her home as soon as he got back. "Here's your beer," Brianna said, and pulled the case from the bed of the pickup. "It's still cold. Jenny and I are going to make ourselves a couple of sandwiches. You want a ham and cheese?" "You know I do. Can you bring it back out here? I'm going to start a fire in the pit." "It's 80-something degrees out, Andy. Do you really want to make it any hotter?" "I like to see the people in the flames, babe. I won't keep it lit all night." "Alrighty then, go see your flame people. Come on, Jenny, I'm starving." The girls went into the cabin. Andy lit up the fire pit and waited to hear the first splash. Brianna came out 10 minutes later with Andy's sandwich wrapped in a paper towel. "Did Frog really go gigging?" Brianna asked. Andy truthfully answered. "That's where he told me he was going, but you never know with Frog." He added that just to cover his ass for when the shit went down. "All right, it's pretty dark out here now. You coming in soon?" "Yeah, I'll be in a little bit. I was trying to wait on Frog to get back. I'm surprised he didn't come running when he heard the beer truck," Andy said, already thinking of how fake mad he was going to be with Frog when the prank unfolded. Andy wondered if Frog would let him get a punch in just to completely exonerate himself from any involvement in his childish ploy. "Just put that fire out before you come in. We don't want to be the ones to burn down the cabins." "Roger that," Andy smiled and pursed his lips for a kiss. Brianna gave him a quick peck. 15 minutes passed and there was no splash, no sound from the area in which Frog disappeared. Andy was getting a little antsy as he stood from his chair, took another gulp of PBR, and turned toward the cabin. He could see the outline of the girls standing near the AC unit. Andy began walking toward the cabin when the first splash finally came. "Ah, so it begins," Andy thought to himself. The girls didn't hear it, or if they did, it wasn't enough ruckus yet to make them come outside. Then there was a second splash, much louder than the first. He saw Brianna's head turn, but she didn't come outside. I guess third time's a charm, is what Andy thought. The third splash came, and it was much louder than the first two. This time, he saw Brianna move toward the door. Then came the scream. It was loud, shrill, and brief. Almost inhuman. It was a scream of severe pain. Brianna came bursting out the door. All right, Andy, tell Frog to cut the shit. Jenny's freaking the hell out in there. She's afraid to come out. Frog, cut the shit! Brianna hollered in the direction of the commotion. There were more splashes. They got louder and closer. Louder and closer. Then, the second scream. It was so loud, Andy was thinking that was one hell of a speaker Frog had brought. Andy and Brianna heard running, and it was coming toward them, very quickly. Frog emerged from the darkness, and his face was white as a sheet. Frog, you son of a Brianna began and then stopped. Her heart felt like it was going ba-boom out of her chest when she heard the next scream. This was no Bluetooth speaker. This was menacing and so full of pain. Damn, Frog, how are you doing that? Andy asked, still not getting it, actually impressed with his friend's skill. It's not me, Andy. It's Elena, and I pissed her off. Stop it, Frog. Take me home. I'm done with this shit, Jenny yelled. Her entire body was shaking. The poor girl was scared out of her mind. I think we all need to leave, Andy said as he realized his buddy wasn't joking. Andy kept calm. Let's just go. We'll come clean up our crap in the morning. There was another tremendous splash, and it was closer than any of the others. The rhythm was almost like thunder followed by lightning. A few seconds after the splash, the screech came. It was a sound of unmitigated pain. The four of them froze in place, and their mouths fell open, almost in unison, at what they saw next. The apparition of Elena was floating above the water just past the shoreline. The front of her head was busted wide open, and her eyes were contorted black pools that looked in opposite directions. She fell into the water with a loud kersplash, and slowly rose again. Her mouth opened wide, and this time the scream pierced them. The eardrums of all four of them were on the verge of exploding in their skulls. Hands went to cover ears on instinct, but it didn't matter. This scream moved through flesh and bone, through space and time. This was the scream of the dead trapped in her watery grave. It was a macabre dance of the dead in which Elena was forever trapped. Jenny was the first to speak when the screaming stopped. She's not going to let us leave. Brianna looked at Andy, and they felt the same apprehension that Jenny spoke aloud. But Andy simply said, "Let's get the hell out of here." Andy and Brianna ran to the truck while Frog and Jenny ran to Frog's Mustang. Andy turned the key and heard the clicking sound associated with a dead battery. Frog did the same. Jenny was shaking in her seat. Brianna was already thinking that they would just book it to 421 on foot. It wasn't that far away, and once they were on that stretch of road, they would be home free. The wind suddenly picked up and the temperature dropped. The four of them got out of the vehicles and moved closer to one another. Brianna wanted to scream, wanted to tell them to run, but something in her gut warned her that would be a big mistake. Jenny's lips were quivering with fear, and Frog didn't look like a prince at all. For the first time in his life, Frog truly felt fear rush up his spine. The calmness that Andy displayed just moments before was replaced with a feeling of despair. They all felt like Brianna, felt as if they should run, but couldn't. Not that anyone or anything was stopping them, but it just felt like a very bad idea. There was another screech, and the four of them turned toward the pond. The apparition was floating above the water just at the shoreline. Her dark hair was flowing behind her, and she wasn't falling this time. Her mouth was contorted as if she were about to release another screech, but this time, she didn't. The spirit of Elena looked directly at Frog with a face of recognition. The spirit began shaking above the water. "What the fuck, Frog?" Andy whispered. I don't know, man," Frog whispered back. She She's pointing at you, Jenny said on the verge of sobbing. No, she's not. She's pointing at us. She don't want us to be here, and I think we should give her what she wants, Frog whispered back. Andy, Jenny, and Brianna slowly stepped away from Frog. Elena's spirit kept pointing to the Valley Prince. It was recognition, and it wasn't coincidence. What the hell, man? What did I ever do to her? I don't know, man, but I wouldn't make any sudden movements if I were you. Summer, 1981. He had seen Elena come in his store through the years. He longed for her, but she was taken. Dustin Hines was her man, and it didn't sit well with him. Not one bit. He heard it through the grapevine that they were going to Langley Pond for a romantic getaway this weekend, and today was Friday. Elena wouldn't give him the time of day, would barely utter a word when she came in to pick out a movie. Sometimes Dustin would be with her. She would come in with her beautiful long black hair and perfect smile, teasing him. Elena had to know that he was in love with her, but she would come in with Dustin flaunting her love for him and, in a sense, a disdain for Frog Spradley. He didn't understand why. Valley Video was going to be his outright in another year. He would be a reputable business owner. Frog was sure that the video rental business would be a necessity for generations to come. But she would come and go, tease him, taunt him, show him what he can't have, show him who was getting her love. This wasn't going to work for Frog. He would be at that pond tonight, just like the song said. Bang, bang, he shot me down. Bang, bang, I hit the ground. Bang, bang, that awful sound. Bang, bang, my baby shot me down. And that's exactly what Frog would do. He would go to the pond. He would hear them making love in the tent. He would take his machete and get Dustin to come outside while Elena was sleeping. He'd hack him up and chop off his head. He'd take the John boat out late. He heard them talking about their late-night fishing trip. She would come out. She would see the light. She would think that her lover was fishing without her. She'd see the man that she scorned. See what she could have had. He would toss the head of her betrothed. She would see him. All she had to do was keep swimming to the boat, and she would have lived. But she turned and swam away, afraid of the man that was truly meant for her. He'd line her up with his deer rifle. Frog was a dead shot. He wasn't going to miss. He'd let her feel as if she may get away before the shot would zip through the back of her skull. It was pure luck that they pinned it on Billie Jean. He always had a short fuse, and that was all very well and good with Frog. He'd find another love, one that would love him. They'd have a baby boy, and he would keep the name of Frog alive. Frog was the spitting image of his father and his grandfather. He'd grow up as a Valley Prince. Frog Sr. wouldn't think of Elena again until he took his final breath in 2015, when the song floated through his mind for the first time since that day. Bang, bang, he shot me down. Bang, bang, I hit the ground. Bang, bang, that awful sound. Bang, bang, my baby shot me down. Frog died with his loved ones around him and tears in his eyes. His family didn't know. The tears weren't for them, but for Elena, the spirit of Langley Pond. Summer, 2021. The specter was transfixed on Frog, and he was in turn locked onto her lifeless eyes. Her mouth curled in pain, and it was as if she were the one seeing a ghost. Frog couldn't move. It was as if he were stuck knees deep in mud, and the air around him was infused with a coldness that chilled him to his soul. The spirit of Langley Pond seemed to know him, and she didn't seem all that thrilled that he was looking at her. "Oh my God!" Brianna screamed in Frog's direction. "She knows you!" Andy turned away from the ghost and saw the angst in Frog's face before he said, "That's impossible. There's no way she knows Frog." The ghost floated closer to them and seemed to put her feet on the ground. The entire shoreline got much colder, and the others felt it. Everyone was stuck in their spot, afraid to make any sudden movement. The four of them formed somewhat of a straight line, and they all faced the spirit of Elena, but that spirit was only focused on one of them. And she changed. The life came back into her eyes. They turned from black pools to light brown. The distortion in her face also melted away. The ghostly apparition that the four of them witnessed floating above the pond changed into healed flesh and blood. She no longer floated but walked toward Frog. He managed to utter the first words to break the silence. Hey, look, what do you want from us?" The young woman smiled at him and held out her hands. Frog wanted to believe this was just a dream, that he had drank 5 too many PBRs and would wake up any minute, but he knew that he was in the here and now. "Take my hand. You were there. You killed my boyfriend. You chopped off his head. And you shot me," Elena said and continued. "Take my hand so I can leave this God-forsaken place." Frog trembled. His brain was trying to fight the overwhelming compulsion to grab Elena's hand. If he did, he thought it might be the last thing that he ever did. Brianna found her courage and spoke. "Elena!" The girl turned to face her. "He couldn't have killed your boyfriend or you. Please, just listen to me." Elena placed her hands at her side and gave Brianna a sense of relief. She was going to listen to her. Good. Look, the year is 2021. You were killed in 1981 by Billie Jean Morris. It was in all the papers. My mama told me about it. The whole town knew it was Billie Jean. He was shot dead, Elena. They got the man that killed you and your boyfriend." Elena turned her attention away from Frog for just a moment and walked to Brianna. Jenny ran to Andy and stuck her head in the crook of his arm like she was trying to shield herself from seeing a kill in a horror movie. Elena walked toward Brianna. She seemed to admire the beauty of the girl. They were close to the same age. Billie Jean Morris did not kill me. Billie Jean Morris never talked to me. I know who I saw, and it was his face, she said, and pointed back at Frog. "Shit, woman, I wasn't even born yet! Please!" Frog pleaded. "It was him," Elena said, and started to turn away from Brianna. Brianna lunged forward and grabbed Elena around her wrist. She was surprised that she didn't pass through her. Brianna really had a grip on the young woman. Elena spun around in Brianna's backwards hug like a slippery eel and placed her hands on Brianna's head. The memory of that night and her death filled Brianna's mind in what felt like a wave of electricity. Brianna blinked rapidly. Andy pushed Jenny away and started to run toward his girlfriend. "No!" Brianna screamed. "Stop!" Andy stopped in his tracks. Elena looked into Brianna's eyes, looking for understanding. "You see, it was him. You see that now, right?" Elena broke Brianna's grip around her waist and turned back to Frog. "What the hell, man? I wasn't even on the planet then!" "It was his daddy," Brianna shouted. This made Elena pause. "It is 2021. His daddy's name was Frog, and his name is Frog. He looks just like his daddy. He didn't have anything to do with it." Andy rushed to his girlfriend's side, and Jenny was right behind him. The three of them stood together. Frog was still frozen in place. Elena moved closer to Frog. She could see the man that chopped off Dustin's head. She could almost feel the bullet break open the back of her skull all over again. He put his hands out in front of him, hoping this would keep her at arm's length. She touched his hand, and it was colder than anything he had ever felt in his young life. You have his blood, and a penance has to be paid, Elena said as she grabbed the Valley Prince by the hand. I will not stay here any longer. I was waiting on him to return, and he never did. But his son will do. You carry the blood of the man that killed me. You should have never been born, Elena said, and pulled Frog closer to her. Brianna and Andy started to run toward them. Jenny was a blubbering mess. To save their friend, but it was too late. Elena had a firm grip on both of Frog's arms, and she morphed back into the specter. Frog was lifted straight up into the sky, his legs kicking and his lungs screaming into the night. Brianna and Andy shouted Frog's name as he disappeared into the sky. His screams went silent. Andy and Brianna looked at one another, waiting for another sound, another sign of life from the Valley Prince. What they heard in the far distance of the pond was a splash, a cackle, and then silence. The spirit of Elena Ann Sanders was now free. It was replaced by the son of the man that killed her and Dustin. This would be the penance that set her free. Brianna, Andy, and Jenny would never be able to explain what they witnessed. They just said Frog went giggin' and never came back. What else could they say? Well, my friends, I feel like that was the perfect story to chill you on a very, very hot day. I know it brought chills up and down my spine, which helped me deal with the fact that I have to have my air conditioner off while I record the story. But totally worth it. And I want to say a very special thank you to the author Charles Campbell. That's from his book, Horror 421, which you can find on Amazon.com. And he's also the co-host of the Horror 421 podcast, which is a horror-related interview show that I highly recommend you subscribe to. And I was one of the first guests, so that's a big win as well. Thanks for the extra spooky this week, Charles. I really do appreciate it. And speaking of appreciate, I want to say a huge thank you to all the folks who are joining up on our Patreon. We've had so many new patrons join up. We're at 84 active patrons at the time I'm recording this, and it really means a lot to me. You guys are keeping the show going and allowing me to have a great time with you every week and give you some bonus content to boot. So please go to WeeklySpooky.com and click on Patreon if you want to join us on the ride. And speaking of Patreon, I want to say an extra special thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay just a little bit extra to hear their names on the show. And they are Christopher Sullivan, Gino Lyons, Karen Ouimet, Jack Kerr, Jeff and George Hilton, Craig Cohen, and Kevin Fry. Thank you all so much for your support. It really is a huge deal to me because your Patreon backing means more to us than any sponsorship, than any merchandise sale. It's your direct support that lets me keep bringing these stories every damn week. Well, my friends, I think it's about time I head out of here and go cool off. So for our executive producer, Rob Fields, our producer, Dan Wilder, and my composer, Ray Mattis, I will talk at you next week.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to find your way back next week. But for now, you are safe. Trust me.